Okay, let's unpack this for a second. Imagine you're jolted awake. Maybe it's a push notification, maybe it's a text message at, I don't know, 3 in the morning.
Yeah.
And it's announcing this major surprise international military operation, something, sudden and really complex, maybe involving a figure like Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro.
Right.
And after that first bit of confession, the real question starts to form in your mind, is this purely about foreign policy, or is this a calculated tactical shield against some political fire that's just raging back home?
That abruptness, that feeling of whiplash right into a world crisis, that is precisely what our source material today says is the core problem.
Mm.
We're diving into a really sharp critique from a political insider,
Mm.
and they argue that this administration has completely normalized what they call absurd behavior.
Absurd.
Yeah, actions that in any previous era would be seen as just beyond the pale, stuff you'd expect from like Vladimir Putin.
And the audacity of the timing, that's really the story here. So the mission for this deep dive is to dissect that exact critique. We're looking at how the need for political survival can allegedly dictate foreign policy.
And also how Congress has failed institutionally as a check on that.
Which all leads to this serious generational structural challenge for political parties around age and,
Hmm.
and leadership tenure.
And what's fascinating is how the analyst defines this normalization. When political leaders, according to this critique, consistently engage in these like high-stakes dramatic diversions,
Right.
the political system, it just stops treating them as a crisis and starts treating them as, a Tuesday.
It just becomes background noise.
Exactly. And that failure of critical reflection is so corrosive, the system just absorbs the behavior. So it raises an important question for you, the listener.
Hmm.
What happens when political insanity or just, blatant self-preservation becomes the norm? The system loses its capacity to be shocked. And that is a deep threat to accountability.
That structural erosion is what makes this so critical. So let's jump right into the mechanism of that erosion in segment 1, the distraction playbook. The source speaker describes the initial shock of getting that 3.0 a.m. text about Venezuela.
The reaction was visceral but professional. I mean, the source fully acknowledged the professionalism of the troops involved
Of course.
and, any potential military success. But the overall action was still described with that really powerful word, nuts.
That's
The core assertion is powerful, and it's pretty cynical. It's that the effectiveness of the operation is almost irrelevant if the action is just a tool. It doesn't solve any of the big immediate problems back home and is explicitly labeled a distraction technique.
okay, so the source isn't just alleging a distraction, they're actually identifying specific targets. What two painful domestic issues, according to this analysis, was this foreign action supposed to be diverting us from?
Well, the first was a financial crisis that was hitting millions of Americans. Healthcare. This Venezuelan news broke just 3 days after Americans had gotten their new healthcare enrollment information.
Oh, wow.
And this wasn't minor news. People were opening bills, and in some cases, their premiums had, doubled or even tripled.
That's an immediate kitchen table crisis.
It's inescapable. And the second issue, that one hits the administration on a much more personal level.
Which is?
That would be the ongoing controversy around the Epstein files. The source argues that massive troves of these files are being released, although the critique adds that the Justice Department is allegedly, and this is a quote, disobeying the law and dragging its feet on those releases. So this accumulation of damaging information, the analyst claims, is the one thing that actually is really hurting the administration right now.
So the source then pivots from these immediate political pressures to the ultimate conclusion about the leader's motivation. The critique is that the president lies to Congress and the public, and it's all, quote, all in the name of protecting himself.
So the foreign action isn't about national interest. It's just a mechanism for political self-defense against, the combined fire of healthcare bills and embarrassing internal documents.
Right.
And this is where the source provides some really interesting context to undermine that classic national interest narrative. I mean, if this were really about strategic resources, you'd expect oil to be the driver, right?
Of course.
But the source just dismisses that. They claim that major oil companies, once they do their own internal math, do not even want Venezuelan oil.
Wait, why not? I thought they had vast reserves.
They do, but the geopolitical reality, the infrastructure, it's all prohibitive. It's heavy, difficult to refine crude, and you've combined that with the massive cost of modernizing sanctioned infrastructure and ensuring compliance.
So the math just doesn't work.
The math doesn't make sense for the big energy companies. So the supposed economic reason for the intervention, it's just removed from the equation.
Leaving, in the source's view, only the motive of domestic political survival.
Exactly.
So if the executive branch is using this cynical playbook, using international crises as domestic shields, the natural question becomes, where are the checks? And this is where the source turns a blistering eye on Capitol Hill, moving us straight into this idea of congressional cowardice and institutional failure.
Yeah, the source offers a truly devastating look behind the curtain of Congress, this uncomfortable divide between private and public reality. We learn that privately, Republican colleagues agree wholeheartedly that these foreign actions are nuts and dangerous.
So they see it. They know what's going on.
They see the reality, they understand the political game being played, but they refuse to say it out loud.
And this internal truth versus external silence is captured by a, quote, the source shares. And this one, it really drives home the hypocrisy. A Republican colleague apparently came up and confessed, look, if Biden were doing this, we'd be crying bloody murder.
Wow. That confession, according to the source, is the definition of political hypocrisy. And the analysis uses one just devastating word to summarize the behavior that enables it: cowardice.
Cowardice.
They argue that members of Congress prioritize what the source calls sucking up to the political leader, to the president, over their fundamental oath to uphold the Constitution.
And to act as a co-equal branch of government.
Yes. And the cost of that cowardice is institutional damage. The critique says this behavior is doing terrible, terrible damage to the institution of Congress, which is designed explicitly to be a crucial check on the executive branch.
And the source uses extremely strong language here, labeling the current legislative body as the weakest Congress.
And led by the weakest speaker in American history.
That's not just hyperbole.
No. The analyst links this assessment specifically to the documented failure to hold a check on the executive, regardless of party. If you connect this to the bigger picture, the failure of the legislative institution to do its basic job, that's a structural threat to democracy itself.
Regardless of who is in the Oval Office.
Exactly. When checks and balances fail because of party loyalty and self-preservation, the whole foundation of governance just erodes. And the long-term implication is this continuous, permanent shift of power toward the executive because Congress is unwilling to hold the line.
So you've got an executive branch allegedly using foreign policy as a distraction, and a legislative branch that's paralyzed by political fear and institutional cowardice. You would think the opposition party, the Democrats, would be perfectly positioned to capitalize on this.
You would think.
But the source provides an equally harsh critique of their own side, which brings us to segment 3, the opposition's credibility problem.
That's right. This Democratic source notes there is a real lack of leadership and a reliance on an old playbook that is it's demonstrably failing to stop the current political trend.
It's not that they don't have good ideas.
No, it's that they can't successfully translate those ideas into trust.
And this fear of honesty is a huge part of that credibility gap. The party is criticized for not being bluntly honest. They're constantly trying not to offend specific groups or, perceived allies.
Right. So, for example, they might be reluctant to criticize the timing of a military operation because they're afraid of upsetting the troops.
Or they're afraid to offend groups like Venezuelan expats who, understandably, want the dictator Maduro gone.
Exactly. And that caution, it just looks like weakness to the electorate.
And this lack of willingness to speak plainly, it creates massive credibility problems. We see it in several high-profile missteps where they were just out of step with the voters' lived experience.
Take immigration. The Democratic Party, according to this critique, ignored immigration. They dismissed it as Republicans just weaponizing the issue for political gain.
But what happened in the last election?
It became the #1 issue in the country.
Wow.
The party's decision to just dismiss the issue allowed them to be defined by their opponents, and it revealed that they were just completely out of touch with the border realities that voters were experiencing everywhere, not just in border states.
And even more acutely felt was the handling of inflation. This is where that, political elite language completely clashes with kitchen table reality.
Absolutely. The decision to dismiss high inflation as transitory, which is an elite economic term, it just rang completely hollow to voters. The source emphasizes that voters are literally, and this is a great image, taking cartons of eggs out of your cart at the checkout line because they can't afford them anymore.
Right.
So when leaders are offering these technical reassurances while voters are seeing with their own eyes that that wasn't the case, it creates this massive trust deficit.
So voters might hate what the other side is doing, the distractions, the self-interest, but they don't trust the opposition to offer a trustworthy, functional alternative.
And that's the core of it. The party has a real credibility problem that requires structural change,
Yeah.
starting with just showing they hear the voters instead of, continuing with blinders on.
And that necessary change and the entrenched nature of the current leadership, that leads us right into our final structural segment, the fight for generational change and age limits.
This moves the analysis from, tactical mistakes and institutional cowardice to deep structural inertia. The source argues that both political parties are being held hostage by these long-serving figures.
Citing the president, a 79-year-old Senate incumbent, former Speaker Pelosi.
Exactly. Examples of this prolonged, entrenched leadership.
Hmm.
And that longevity creates both a political and a governance danger, especially in the House where the margins are razor thin.
Right.
The source illustrates this pretty starkly, pointing out that 3 Democratic House colleagues died in the past year. And they note that a major bill vote would have been defeated if just one of those deaths had happened a day later. These long tenures created genuine physical instability when the political margins are that small.
Which is why the source speaker advocates so strongly for an upper age limit. They point to the precedent set by Massachusetts, with its 70-year limit for judges, as a model.
Right. It shows that society has already accepted that we can, and sometimes should, impose limits on public service longevity, even for highly experienced people, just to ensure institutional dynamism.
And to make that point relatable, the source uses a really compelling Marine Corps analogy.
Yeah, they contrast the fact that we entrust extraordinary responsibility and, life or death decisions to 18-year-old Marines, who are often far more professional and disciplined than some members of Congress with the longevity of power in Washington. If we accept a lower age limit for Congress, which is currently 26, the source argues an upper limit is entirely reasonable and necessary.
That's such a powerful contrast, entrusting the ultimate immediate decision to an 18-year-old on the ground, while having concerns about the decision-making agility of someone who has been in power for 50 years.
And the source isn't dismissing experience. They're prioritizing capacity and adaptation. Their campaign, which is running against a senator elected for half a century, is framed as a contest against this calcified political establishment.
An establishment that they say can't adapt to new issues like immigration and inflation because the operating framework hasn't been updated since, like, the 1970s.
Exactly. And the political establishment's reaction seems to confirm this. The incumbent senator has received these high-profile endorsements from major party figures, including Elizabeth Warren.
And the source interprets those endorsements not as a sign of victory, but as political proof.
Proof that the establishment supports the status quo and is actively trying to prevent new generational leadership. Endorsements don't win races, but they definitely signal who the existing power structure is standing with.
But the source speaker has a history of successfully operating outside that establishment. They point to their work with Serve America in 2018, which was explicitly designed to work outside the traditional Democratic infrastructure.
And it helped flip about half the seats the party gained that year.
So the success shows that the message of a new generation of leaders is clearly resonating enough to generate some strong early momentum.
The conclusion is respectful, but it's uncompromising, while acknowledging and respecting the incumbent's long public service.
I mean, dedicating the majority of your life to it.
Absolutely. The ultimate stress point remains the need to pass the torch to a new generation of leaders. It's about respecting the past while acknowledging that the current structural challenges, the failure to adapt, the lack of credibility, the institutional cowardice, are all deeply linked to a leadership that has just been in place for far too long.
So what does this all mean? Our deep dive has revealed this dangerous cycle where foreign policy actions are allegedly used as a powerful, distracting shield against fundamental failures of governance and credibility.
And this cycle is then compounded by a congressional culture of silence and cowardice.
Which is itself reinforced by an entrenched, aging party leadership that is structurally resistant to the very change needed to address voter concerns like immigration and inflation.
Yeah, the issues of political cowardice and lack of accountability are just profoundly tied to the longevity of tenure. When leaders stay in power for decades, their focus shifts from responsive governance and constitutional duty to political self-preservation, which enables the very problems this critique highlights.
This all boils down to a single critical structural challenge for you, the voter. We've discussed the call for an upper age limit in politics as a remedy for this inertia. So, if the main challenge to fixing our national problems, from credibility gaps to institutional failure, is structural inertia from long term leadership, should voters prioritize the age and tenure of a candidate over their legislative experience?
Even if it means risking some established legislative expertise.
Exactly. It's a choice that is worth truly mulling over as the next election cycle approaches.